The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as Sergeant Marcus Steele adjusted his uniform and checked his watch. Today was orientation day for the new recruits, and Marcus had a reputation to maintain. He was known as the toughest drill instructor on Base Delta 7, the kind of soldier who could break a recruit's spirit with just a look and a few well-chosen words. Marcus had been serving for 15 years, working his way up from a scared 18-year-old private to one of the most respected non-commissioned officers on the base. He took pride in his ability to spot weakness in new soldiers and eliminate it before it could spread to others. In his mind, the military was no place for the soft-hearted or weak-willed. As he walked toward the assembly area, Marcus noticed a group of new recruits gathered near the barracks. They looked exactly as he expected, nervous, uncertain, and completely unprepared for what military life would demand of them. Most were young men and women fresh out of high school or college, with dreams of serving their country but no real understanding of what that meant. Among the group stood a young woman who immediately caught Marcus's attention, but not for the right reasons. She was shorter than most of the other recruits, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. What bothered Marcus wasn't her appearance but her demeanor. While the other recruits fidgeted nervously or whispered anxiously to each other, this woman stood perfectly still, her posture straight and her eyes scanning the surroundings with what looked like casual interest rather than proper military alertness. Marcus had seen this type before, civilians who thought they understood military life because they'd watched movies or read books. They usually lasted about a week before reality hit them, and they either shaped up or requested a transfer. This particular recruit seemed to embody everything Marcus disliked about the new generation of soldiers. She appeared too comfortable, too relaxed, as if she was on a casual tour rather than beginning the most challenging experience of her life. The woman wore the standard issue uniform that all new recruits received, but somehow it looked different on her. While the other recruits' uniforms hung awkwardly or looked obviously new, hers seemed to fit naturally, as if she'd been wearing military clothing for years. Marcus dismissed this observation, assuming she'd simply gotten lucky with the sizing or had taken extra time to adjust the fit. As Marcus approached the group, he decided this recruit would be his primary focus for the day. In his experience, making an example of one soldier early in training sent a clear message to all the others about what was expected. He'd learned that targeting the most confident-looking recruit often worked best, as it showed the others that no one was safe from scrutiny and discipline. "Attention," Marcus barked as he reached the group. The recruits immediately snapped to what they thought was proper attention, though their formation was sloppy, and their timing was off. All except the woman Marcus had been watching. She moved into position smoothly and naturally, her posture perfect and her eyes focused straight ahead. This only irritated Marcus further. He walked slowly along the line of recruits, his heavy boots clicking against the concrete. When he reached the woman, he stopped and turned to face her directly. Up close, he could see that she was probably in her late 20s, older than most of the other recruits. Her face showed no signs of nervousness or intimidation, which Marcus found particularly annoying. "What's your name, recruit?" Marcus demanded, his voice carrying the harsh edge he'd perfected over years of training soldiers. "Rivera." "Sergeant," she replied calmly, her voice steady and clear. "Rivera," Marcus repeated, drawing out the name as he studied her face for any signs of weakness. "You seem awfully comfortable for someone who just arrived at my base, Rivera. Tell me, do you think this is going to be easy?" "No, Sergeant," Rivera responded without hesitation. Marcus circled around her slowly, looking for any detail that was out of place. Her boots were properly laced, her uniform was correctly pressed, and her hair met regulations perfectly. This level of preparation from a new recruit was unusual, and it made Marcus more determined to find fault with her. "Where are you from, Rivera?" he asked, stopping in front of her again. "California, Sergeant." "California," Marcus said with obvious disdain. "Let me guess. You're here because you think military service will look good on your resume? Or maybe you watched too many action movies and decided you wanted to play soldier for a few years." Rivera's expression didn't change, but Marcus thought he saw something flicker in her eyes. Not fear or anger, but something else he couldn't quite identify. It looked almost like amusement, which made his irritation grow stronger. "I'm here to serve, Sergeant," Rivera said simply. The other recruits remained frozen in position, watching this exchange with obvious anxiety. They could sense the tension building, and most were grateful they weren't the focus of the sergeant's attention. Marcus could feel their fear, which normally would have satisfied him, but his focus remained entirely on Rivera. To serve, Marcus repeated mockingly.
How noble.
Tell me, Rivera, what makes you think you have what it takes to serve in the real military? This isn't summer camp, and it's not a college program. This is where people learn to fight and die for their country. Rivera maintained her position and her composure throughout Marcus's verbal assault. Her calm response to his intimidation tactics was unlike anything he'd encountered from new recruits. Usually, by this point, soldiers were either visibly shaking with nervousness or showing signs of anger that he could exploit. Rivera showed neither reaction. I understand the seriousness of military service, Sergeant, she replied. Marcus stepped closer to her, using his height advantage to try to intimidate her. Do you really? Because you don't look like someone who understands anything about real military life. You look like someone who's pretending to be a soldier. The morning continued with Marcus focusing most of his attention on Rivera, while putting the other recruits through basic exercises and orientations. No matter what he threw at her, unexpected questions, physical challenges, or verbal confrontations, Rivera handled everything with the same calm professionalism. This consistency began to puzzle Marcus, though he was far too proud to admit that a new recruit was impressing him. As the first day of training concluded, Marcus felt more frustrated than usual. Rivera had not given him the reaction he wanted, and her composure had remained unshakable throughout every test he'd devised. The second day of training began before dawn as Marcus had planned. He believed in starting early to break down the civilian habits of new recruits and establish the rhythm of military life. As he walked toward the training grounds, he was already planning how to increase the pressure on Rivera. Her calm performance the previous day had bothered him throughout the night, and he was determined to find her breaking point. When Marcus arrived at the assembly area, he was surprised to find Rivera already there, standing at perfect attention. The other recruits were still stumbling out of their barracks, half asleep and struggling to get their uniforms straight. Rivera, however, looked as if she'd been awake for hours. Her uniform was immaculate, her boots were polished to a mirror shine, and her posture was flawless. Marcus felt his irritation growing again. In his experience, recruits who tried to show off early in training were usually compensating for some hidden weakness. He'd make sure to find Rivera's weakness and expose it in front of the others. Well, Marcus said as he approached Rivera. Look who decided to play soldier again today. Tell me, Rivera, did you wake up early to practice looking military, or does this come naturally to someone from California? Rivera's response was the same calm acknowledgement as before. Good morning, Sergeant. As the other recruits gathered, Marcus began the day with physical training. He'd designed a particularly challenging course that included running, climbing, and various exercises meant to test both physical ability and mental toughness. Marcus positioned himself where he could watch Rivera's performance while still monitoring the other recruits. The running portion began with a 3-mile course around the base. Marcus expected Rivera's smaller stature to work against her, especially since many of the male recruits were obviously in better physical condition. However, as the group began running, Rivera settled into a steady pace that looked effortless. While other recruits were already breathing heavily after the first mile, Rivera maintained her form and breathing as if she was taking a casual jog. Marcus followed the group in a jeep, calling out instructions and criticism through a megaphone. He paid special attention to Rivera, hoping to see signs of fatigue or struggle that he could exploit. Instead, he watched as she gradually moved from the middle of the pack toward the front, passing other recruits who were already beginning to fall behind. By the end of the run, Rivera finished in the top 3, and she wasn't even breathing hard. The 2 recruits who finished ahead of her were both former college athletes who had bragged about their running experience during introductions. Rivera had never mentioned any athletic background, yet she'd outperformed most of the group with what appeared to be minimal effort. The obstacle course was next, and Marcus was confident this would be where Rivera's limitations would show. The course included rope climbing, wall scaling, crawling under barbed wire, and navigating various barriers designed to test agility, strength, and problem-solving under pressure. Most new recruits struggled with at least some portion of the course, providing Marcus with plenty of opportunities for correction and instruction. Rivera approached the first obstacle, a 12-foot wall that had to be climbed without assistance. Many recruits struggled with this challenge, often requiring multiple attempts or help from instructors. Rivera studied the wall for a moment, then approached it with confidence. Her technique was flawless as she found handholds and footholds that others had missed, scaling the wall in a fluid motion that looked almost easy. Marcus watched in growing amazement as Rivera moved through the entire course with skill that seemed far too advanced for a new recruit. Her rope climbing technique was textbook perfect, her crawling form was efficient and fast, and she navigated the balance beams and other obstacles as if she'd practiced them hundreds of times before. When Rivera completed the course with the best time of the day, Marcus felt genuine confusion for the first time in years. New recruits simply didn't perform at this level, no matter what their background was. Something about Rivera wasn't adding up, but Marcus couldn't figure out what it was. During the lunch break, Marcus decided to do something he rarely did. He looked up Rivera's file in the administrative office. What he found only deepened the mystery. Her paperwork showed she was 28 years old, had a college degree in international relations, and had listed no prior military experience. Her emergency contact was listed simply as Department of Defense Personnel Office, with a phone number Marcus didn't recognize. The afternoon brought weapons training, which Marcus was certain would reveal Rivera's inexperience. Handling military firearms required specific training and practice that civilians didn't receive. As he explained the safety procedures and basic operation of the standard-issue rifle, Marcus watched Rivera carefully for signs of uncertainty or nervousness. When the recruits were given their weapons for the first time, Marcus expected to see the usual fumbling and awkwardness that came with unfamiliarity. Most new soldiers handled military weapons like they were dangerous artifacts, unsure of every movement and constantly seeking reassurance from instructors. Rivera's behavior was completely different. She accepted the weapon with confidence, performed the safety check with smooth, practiced movements, and held it with the natural ease of someone who'd done it countless times before. When Marcus called for the recruits to assume firing positions, Rivera's stance and grip were perfect without any instruction or correction. On the firing range, Rivera's performance was extraordinary. While other recruits struggled to hit the target at all, Rivera placed shot after shot in the center ring with mechanical precision. Her breathing was controlled, her trigger pull was smooth, and her follow-through was textbook perfect. Marcus had seen this level of marksmanship only from soldiers with years of experience or specialized training. As the day concluded, Marcus found himself in an unusual position. For the first time in his career as an instructor, he had encountered a recruit who seemed to already possess all the skills he was supposed to teach. Rivera's performance wasn't just good for a new soldier, it was exceptional by any standard. That evening, Marcus made a decision that went against his usual instincts. Instead of continuing his aggressive approach with Rivera, he decided to observe her more carefully and try to understand what made her different from every other recruit he'd trained. The mystery of Rivera was becoming more intriguing than frustrating, and Marcus realized he needed to change his strategy if he was going to figure out who she really was and why she was pretending to be something she clearly wasn't. The third day brought tactical exercises, and Marcus had designed scenarios specifically to challenge Rivera. He wanted to see how she would perform in situations that required not just physical skills, but leadership, strategy, and decision-making under pressure. These exercises typically separated the natural leaders from the followers, and Marcus was curious to see which category Rivera would fall into. The morning exercise involved a simulated rescue mission where the recruits had to work together to retrieve wounded soldiers from a hostile area. Marcus divided the group into teams and gave them minimal instructions, preferring to let them figure out the challenges themselves. This approach usually revealed personality types quickly. Some recruits panicked under pressure, others became overly aggressive, and a few naturally took charge of their teams. Marcus placed Rivera in a team with some of the most difficult recruits, hoping the challenging group dynamic would finally reveal some weakness in her composure. The team included Johnson, a former college football player who thought he knew everything about strategy. Williams, a quiet recruit who rarely spoke but seemed to analyze everything. And Peterson, an overly eager young man who tended to act without thinking. As the exercise began, Marcus positioned himself where he could observe Rivera's team closely. He expected to see the usual chaos that occurred when strong personalities clashed without clear leadership. Instead, He watched Rivera quietly assess her teammates and the situation before making her move. Rather than immediately taking charge, Rivera spent the first few minutes listening to the others' ideas and asking strategic questions. When Johnson proposed a direct assault approach, Rivera calmly pointed out potential flaws without dismissing his enthusiasm. When Peterson wanted to rush in immediately, Rivera suggested they take time to plan properly. Her approach was subtle but effective. She guided the team toward better decisions without making anyone feel stupid or ignored. Marcus noticed that Rivera's questions seemed designed to help her teammates think through problems themselves, rather than simply giving them answers. When Williams mentioned a concern about their flanking route, Rivera asked follow-up questions that led him to develop a better alternative plan. When Peterson's eagerness threatened to compromise their stealth approach, Rivera found ways to channel his energy into useful tasks. The most impressive aspect of Rivera's performance was how naturally the others began following her lead. Within 20 minutes, she had become the unofficial leader of the group without ever formally taking command or raising her voice. Marcus had seen natural leaders before, but Rivera's approach was more sophisticated than anything he'd encountered from new recruits. When the exercise reached its critical phase, Rivera's team executed their plan with precision that surprised even Marcus. They approached the objective with proper tactical spacing, communicated effectively using hand signals, and adapted quickly when Marcus introduced unexpected complications. Rivera's role throughout was that of a coordinator rather than a dictator. She made sure everyone knew their responsibilities and felt confident in their abilities. The results spoke for themselves. Rivera's team completed the mission faster than any other group, with no casualties and minimal mistakes. More importantly, every member of her team seemed energized and proud of their performance. Marcus had never seen new recruits work together so effectively so quickly. During the debrief session, Marcus asked each team to explain their strategy and decision-making process. When Rivera's team presented, Marcus noticed something interesting. Rivera made sure each teammate got credit for their contributions to the plan, and she consistently referred to their success as a group achievement rather than taking personal credit. This behavior puzzled Marcus even more. In his experience, people with Rivera's obvious skills usually wanted recognition for their abilities. Effective leaders in the military typically had strong personalities and weren't shy about demonstrating their competence. Rivera seemed to possess all the skills of an exceptional leader, while actively avoiding the spotlight that usually came with such performance. The afternoon brought weapons maintenance and military protocol training. Marcus watched Rivera work on her weapon with the same quiet competence she'd shown in everything else. Her cleaning technique was flawless. Her knowledge of the weapon's components was complete, and she finished the task in half the time it took other recruits. During protocol training, Marcus taught the recruits about military hierarchy, proper forms of address, and basic regulations. This was usually one of the most boring parts of training for new soldiers, and Marcus expected to see the usual signs of boredom or confusion. Rivera, however, seemed already familiar with everything he was teaching. When Marcus explained the various ranks and their insignia, Rivera's attention was focused but not intense, as if she was reviewing information she already knew, rather than learning it for the first time. When he covered proper saluting procedures, Rivera's execution was perfect from the first attempt. Most recruits needed multiple corrections before they could salute properly, but Rivera performed each movement with military precision. Marcus decided to test Rivera's knowledge with some advanced questions that weren't part of the standard curriculum. He asked about specific regulations that most recruits wouldn't encounter until much later in their training. Rivera answered each question accurately and completely, often providing details that went beyond what Marcus had asked for. The other recruits began to notice Rivera's exceptional performance, and Marcus could see their reactions changing from curiosity to respect. Some seemed inspired by her example, working harder to match her standards. Others appeared intimidated, wondering if they could ever reach her level of competence. As the day ended, Marcus realized he needed to make a decision about how to handle Rivera going forward. Her skills were clearly beyond those of a typical recruit, and continuing to treat her like a new soldier was becoming increasingly pointless. At the same time, He couldn't simply ignore military protocol and procedures without understanding who she really was and why she was in his training program. That evening, Marcus made another attempt to research Rivera's background. He called contacts in other divisions and tried to find any information about her previous assignments or training. Every inquiry led to the same result. No records, no references, and polite suggestions that he focus on his current responsibilities, rather than asking questions about individual recruits. The message was clear. Someone with significant authority wanted Rivera's background to remain private, and Marcus wasn't supposed to dig any deeper. This realization only made him more certain that Rivera was not what she appeared to be. The question was whether she was there for legitimate reasons, or if her presence represented some kind of test or evaluation that he wasn't aware of. Marcus went to sleep that night with more questions than answers, but also with a growing respect for Rivera's abilities and character. Whatever her real story was, she was clearly an exceptional soldier who deserved his professional attention, rather than his attempts at intimidation. The fourth day brought an unexpected development that would change everything. Marcus arrived at the training area to find Colonel Harrison waiting for him, along with two other officers he didn't recognize. Colonel Harrison was the base commander, and his presence during routine recruit training was highly unusual. Marcus immediately sensed that something significant was happening. "Sergeant Steele," Colonel Harrison said as Marcus approached, "we need to observe today's training exercises. Continue with your planned activities, but be aware that we'll be evaluating the progress of all recruits." Marcus nodded professionally, though his mind was racing with questions. High-ranking officers didn't typically observe basic training unless there was a specific reason. His first thought was that Rivera's exceptional performance had attracted attention from command, and they wanted to see what was happening with the recruit training program. The day's exercise was designed to be the most challenging yet, a complex scenario that combined everything the recruits had learned over the past few days. Marcus had planned it as a comprehensive test of individual skills and team coordination. With officers watching, the pressure on all the recruits would be even higher. As the recruits assembled, Marcus noticed that Rivera seemed completely unaffected by the presence of the senior officers. While other recruits glanced nervously at the observers, Rivera maintained her usual calm focus on the task ahead. This lack of intimidation by high-ranking officials was another sign that Rivera was not a typical new soldier. The exercise scenario involved a simulated, base defense situation where multiple teams had to coordinate their responses to different types of attacks. Each team was given specific objectives, but success depended on communication and cooperation between all groups. Marcus had designed it to be deliberately confusing and stressful. With incomplete information and changing priorities, Rivera's team was assigned to secure the communications center while maintaining contact with other units. As the exercise began, Marcus watched her take charge of the situation with calm efficiency. She quickly assessed the tactical situation, assigned roles to her teammates based on their strengths, and established communication protocols with other teams. What impressed Marcus most was how Rivera seemed to understand the bigger picture of the exercise almost immediately. While other teams struggled with their specific tasks, Rivera's group completed their primary objective and then began providing support to teams that were having difficulties. She appeared to see connections and priorities that the other recruits missed entirely. About halfway through the exercise, Marcus introduced a complication designed to test leadership under extreme pressure. He simulated the loss of the primary communication system, forcing the teams to adapt their plans and find alternative ways to coordinate. This type of crisis usually caused significant confusion and often led to mission failure. Rivera's response to the crisis was remarkable. Without hesitation, she implemented a backup communication plan using hand signals and runners that she had apparently developed during the initial planning phase. She had anticipated the possibility of communication failure and prepared accordingly, something that even experienced soldiers sometimes failed to do. More importantly, Rivera immediately began helping other teams adapt to the new situation. She sent her teammates to assist groups that were struggling with the loss of communications, effectively expanding her leadership beyond her own team to encompass the entire exercise. This type of strategic thinking and selfless leadership was exceptional at any level. But from a new recruit, it was almost unprecedented. Colonel Harrison and his companions were clearly paying special attention to Rivera's performance. Marcus noticed them taking notes and exchanging meaningful glances as they watched her coordinate the response to the crisis. Their interest confirmed Marcus's growing suspicion that Rivera's presence in basic training was not what it appeared to be. As the exercise reached its climax, Rivera made a decision that demonstrated her understanding of military priorities in a way that stunned Marcus. When faced with a choice between completing her team's secondary objective or helping another team prevent a simulated catastrophic failure, Rivera chose to abandon her own mission to help others. She understood that overall mission success was more important than individual achievement. Under Rivera's informal coordination, the entire group of recruits managed to adapt to the changing scenario and achieve most of their objectives despite the significant obstacles Marcus had introduced. The level of cooperation and effective communication was far beyond what he typically saw from recruits at this stage of training. When the exercise concluded, Colonel Harrison approached Marcus for a private conversation while the other officers spoke with some of the recruits, including Rivera. Marcus could see that Rivera's conversation with the officers seemed relaxed and professional, more like colleagues discussing mutual interests than superiors evaluating a subordinate. "Sergeant Steele," Colonel Harrison said quietly, "I need to ask you about Recruit Rivera's performance over the past few days." "Sir, she's been exceptional in every aspect of training," Marcus replied honestly. Her skills and knowledge seemed far advanced for someone with no prior military experience. Colonel Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "What has been your approach with her during training?" Marcus felt a moment of uncomfortable self-reflection as he considered his answer. "Initially, I focused significant attention on her because she seemed too confident for a new recruit. I attempted to challenge her composure and find weaknesses that needed correction. And what did you discover?" "That she doesn't appear to have any weaknesses that require basic training to address, sir. Her performance has been consistently superior in all areas." Colonel Harrison was quiet for a moment before responding. "Sergeant Steele, I'm going to share some information with you that must remain confidential. Recruit Rivera is not actually a new soldier. She's here as part of a special evaluation process." Marcus felt his understanding of the past 4 days shifting dramatically. "What kind of evaluation, sir?" "That information is classified, but I can tell you that her presence here has served multiple purposes. One of those purposes was to evaluate the quality and effectiveness of our training programs and instructors." The implications of this revelation hit Marcus immediately. Rivera hadn't been a recruit for him to train. She had been evaluating his performance as an instructor. Every interaction, every exercise, every moment of the past 4 days had been a test of his abilities, not hers. Marcus realized that his initial approach of trying to intimidate and break down Rivera could have been seen as a serious failure of leadership and professionalism. The thought that his aggressive tactics had been observed and evaluated by someone with the authority to assess his competence was deeply unsettling. "Sir," Marcus said carefully, "if I had known—" "But you didn't know, Sergeant, and that was the point. We needed to see how our instructors perform under normal circumstances, without the artificial behavior that comes when people know they're being evaluated." As Marcus processed this information, he realized that despite his initial mistakes, the past few days had ultimately shown his ability to recognize exceptional talent and adapt his approach accordingly. His decision to step back and observe Rivera rather than continuing his confrontational tactics might have saved his reputation. After Colonel Harrison's revelation, Marcus found himself looking at everything differently. The past 4 days took on new meaning as he realized he had been unknowingly participating in his own evaluation. As he watched Rivera interact with the other officers, he began to notice details that made much more sense in this new context. The way Rivera carried herself, her natural command presence, her immediate comfort with military protocols, these weren't signs of unusual talent for a new recruit. They were indicators of someone with significant military experience and possibly high rank. Marcus felt a mixture of embarrassment and curiosity as he wondered just how senior Rivera actually was. Colonel Harrison dismissed the other officers and called Marcus over to where Rivera was standing. As they approached, Marcus noticed that Rivera's demeanor had shifted slightly. She still maintained proper military bearing, but there was a subtle change in her posture and expression that suggested she was no longer playing the role of a recruit. "Sergeant Steele," Colonel Harrison said formally, "I'd like you to meet Admiral Sarah Rivera, Deputy Commander of Pacific Naval Operations." Marcus felt his world shift completely. Admiral, one of the highest-ranking officers in the entire military, and he had spent 4 days trying to intimidate her like a new recruit. The realization of what he had done, attempting to break down someone who outranked him by several levels, was both mortifying and terrifying. Admiral Rivera extended her hand to Marcus with a slight smile. "Sergeant Steele, it's been an educational few days. I want to thank you for maintaining the integrity of the exercise." Marcus shook her hand, still struggling to process the situation. "Admiral, I need to apologize for my conduct over the past few days. If you had known, the evaluation would have been meaningless," Rivera interrupted gently. "The point was to observe normal training procedures and instructor behavior under typical circumstances." Colonel Harrison added, "Admiral Rivera has been conducting a comprehensive review of our training programs across multiple bases. Her evaluation will help determine improvements to our recruit development processes." Marcus realized that his career could be significantly impacted by Rivera's assessment of his performance. The aggressive approach he'd initially taken with her, the assumptions he'd made, and his overall conduct during the past few days would all be part of her official report. "Sergeant," Rivera said, seeming to sense his concerns, "I want you to understand that your performance, particularly your ability to recognize and adapt to unexpected circumstances, has been quite impressive. Your initial approach was standard for drill instructors, and more importantly, you demonstrated excellent judgment in adjusting your methods when the situation warranted it." This unexpected praise confused Marcus. He had expected criticism for his aggressive tactics and assumptions about Rivera's capabilities. Instead, she seemed to be commending his adaptability and observational skills. Rivera continued, "One of the things we've been studying is how effectively our training programs develop leadership skills in new soldiers. Your exercises over the past 4 days have provided excellent insights into recruit development and instructor methodology." "Admiral," Marcus said carefully, "may I ask what you observed that will be useful for improving training programs?" "Several things," Rivera replied. "First, your progression from individual skills to team coordination follows sound pedagogical principles. Second, your ability to design exercises that reveal natural leadership qualities is excellent. Third, and perhaps most importantly, you demonstrated the flexibility to modify your approach when you encountered unexpected circumstances." Marcus realized that Rivera was referring to his decision to stop trying to intimidate her and instead observe her exceptional performance. What he had seen as a professional failure on his part, she apparently viewed as good judgment and adaptability. Colonel Harrison interjected, "Admiral Rivera has recommended that your training methods be studied and potentially implemented at other bases. Your ability to create challenging scenarios that promote both individual growth and team development has been particularly noted." This news was beyond what Marcus could have imagined when the day started. Instead of facing discipline for his conduct, he was apparently being recognized for excellence in training methodology. The irony that this recognition came from someone he had initially tried to intimidate was not lost on him. "There is one specific area I'd like to discuss further," Rivera said. "Your response when you realized that I was performing beyond typical recruit levels. Many instructors would have either ignored the anomaly or become suspicious and confrontational. You chose to observe and adapt, which demonstrates mature leadership judgment." Marcus thought back to his decision to change tactics with Rivera. At the time, it had been driven more by curiosity than strategic thinking. But he was beginning to understand that his instinctive response had been professionally sound. "Admiral, I have to admit that I was more confused than strategic in my thinking," Marcus said honestly. "Your performance was unlike anything I'd encountered, and I wasn't sure how to handle the situation." Rivera smiled appreciatively. "Honesty about uncertainty is a valuable leadership quality, Sergeant. Many people in positions of authority feel they must pretend to have all the answers. Your willingness to admit when you're facing something new shows maturity and wisdom." The conversation was interrupted by the approach of another officer, this one wearing the insignia of a base communications specialist. He saluted Rivera and handed her a message folder. "Admiral, you have an urgent communication from Washington," the specialist said. Rivera reviewed the message quickly, and Marcus could see her expression become more serious. When she finished reading, she looked up at Colonel Harrison with an expression that suggested important developments. "Colonel, I need to cut this evaluation short. I'm being recalled to Washington immediately for a situation that requires my attention," Rivera said. She turned to Marcus. "Sergeant Steele, I want to thank you again for your professionalism during this exercise. You should expect to receive formal recognition for your contributions to this evaluation, and I will be recommending you for advanced instructor training." Marcus felt overwhelmed by the rapid changes in his understanding of the situation. In the space of a few minutes, he had gone from thinking he was in trouble to learning he was being recommended for advancement. "Admiral, it has been an honor," Marcus said, finally finding his voice. "I hope the insights from this evaluation prove useful." As Rivera prepared to leave, she paused and looked back at Marcus. "One final thought, Sergeant. Never underestimate the value of treating every soldier, regardless of their apparent experience level, with the respect and attention they deserve. You never know who you might be training or what they might teach you in return." In the days following Admiral Rivera's departure, Marcus found himself reflecting deeply on everything that had happened. The revelation that he had unknowingly been training one of the military's most senior officers had fundamentally changed his perspective on leadership, assumptions, and the importance of treating every soldier with respect regardless of their apparent rank or experience. The other recruits had no idea what had really occurred. From their perspective, Rivera had simply been transferred to another assignment, which was common enough during training programs. Marcus maintained this fiction as instructed, but he couldn't shake the memory of how Rivera had effortlessly outperformed everyone while maintaining the demeanor of a new soldier. Colonel Harrison called Marcus to his office 3 days after Rivera left. When Marcus arrived, he found the colonel reviewing several documents that appeared to be evaluation reports. "Sergeant Steele," Colonel Harrison began, "I've received Admiral Rivera's preliminary assessment of her time here. I thought you should know the key points before the formal report is filed." Marcus sat down, still uncertain about how Rivera's evaluation would ultimately affect his career. Despite her positive comments during their final conversation, he worried that a more detailed analysis might reveal serious shortcomings in his initial approach. "The Admiral's assessment of your training methods is overwhelmingly positive," Colonel Harrison continued. "She specifically commended your ability to create realistic scenarios that test both individual skills and group dynamics. She also noted that your exercises revealed leadership potential in several recruits who might not have been identified through standard training protocols." This was better news than Marcus had dared hope for. Rivera's professional evaluation carried significant weight throughout the military hierarchy, and positive recognition from her could open doors for advancement opportunities he had never considered possible. "There's more," Colonel Harrison said. "Admiral Rivera has recommended that you be selected for the Advanced Military Education Program. If you're interested, you would attend a 6-month leadership development course that prepares senior non-commissioned officers for expanded responsibilities." Marcus was stunned. The Advanced Military Education Program was highly competitive, typically reserved for soldiers who had been identified as having exceptional potential for senior leadership roles. Being recommended for the program by someone of Rivera's stature was an extraordinary opportunity. "Sir, I'm honored by the recommendation," Marcus said. "I would definitely be interested in participating." Colonel Harrison smiled. "I thought you might be. There's one condition, though. Admiral Rivera specifically requested that your first assignment after completing the program be as a lead instructor in the new Multi-Service Training Initiative." The Multi-Service Training Initiative was a prestigious program that brought together recruits from different military branches for combined training exercises. Lead instructors in the program worked with some of the most promising soldiers in the military and had significant influence on the development of future military leaders. "Admiral, Rivera believes your ability to recognize and develop diverse types of talent makes you ideal for working with recruits from different military backgrounds," Colonel Harrison explained. As Marcus considered this opportunity, he realized how much his perspective had changed over the past week. Before meeting Rivera, he had been confident in his training methods but limited in his vision of what was possible. Her example had shown him that effective leadership could take many forms, and that the best leaders often worked quietly behind the scenes to help others succeed. Over the following weeks, Marcus began implementing changes to his training programs based on what he had learned from observing Rivera. He placed greater emphasis on developing each recruit's individual strengths rather than trying to force everyone into the same mold. He also began incorporating more complex scenarios that required collaboration and creative problem-solving. The results were immediately apparent. Recruits in his programs began showing higher levels of engagement and confidence. More importantly, soldiers who had previously seemed unremarkable began demonstrating leadership qualities when given appropriate challenges and support. Marcus also changed his approach to dealing with recruits who seemed unusually confident or capable. Instead of immediately trying to humble them, he now looked for ways to understand their backgrounds and channel their abilities constructively. He realized that exceptional soldiers could be valuable resources for helping other recruits develop their skills. One recruit in particular reminded Marcus of Rivera. Private Chen was a quiet young woman who seemed to adapt to military life unusually quickly. Instead of targeting her for extra scrutiny, Marcus observed her performance carefully and gave her opportunities to demonstrate her capabilities. Chen's background turned out to be extensive martial arts, training and leadership experience in civilian emergency response teams. Rather than treating these qualifications as threats to military hierarchy, Marcus found ways to incorporate her expertise into training exercises. Her knowledge of tactical movement and crisis management proved valuable for helping other recruits develop similar skills. The success of this approach reinforced the lessons Marcus had learned from his experience with Rivera. Every soldier brought unique knowledge and abilities to their service, and effective instructors found ways to build on these strengths rather than trying to eliminate them. 3 months after Rivera's departure, Marcus received notification that his application for the Advanced Military Education Program had been approved. Along with the acceptance letter came a personal note from Admiral Rivera, congratulating him on his selection and expressing her confidence in his potential for senior leadership roles. The note included one final piece of advice that Marcus would remember throughout the rest of his career. The best leaders are those who help others discover capabilities they didn't know they possessed. Your willingness to learn and adapt demonstrates that you have the potential to be that kind of leader. As Marcus prepared for his new educational assignment, he reflected on how a single week of training had transformed his understanding of military leadership. What had begun as his attempt to intimidate a seemingly overconfident recruit had ended with him receiving recognition and opportunities he had never imagined possible. More importantly, he had learned that true strength in leadership came not from demonstrating superiority over others, but from recognizing and developing the potential in every soldier under his command. Admiral Rivera had taught him this lesson not through lectures or formal instruction, but through her own example of quiet competence and selfless leadership. 2 years later, Marcus stood in his new office at the Multi-Service Training Command, reviewing files for the next group of instructors he would be training. His promotion to Master Sergeant had come through 6 months earlier, along with his appointment as Director of Advanced Training Methods. The path from drill instructor to senior leadership had been faster than anyone had predicted, but Marcus knew exactly who deserved credit for opening those doors. The Advanced Military Education Program had been transformative, exposing Marcus to leadership theories and training methodologies he had never encountered. More importantly, it had connected him with senior officers from all branches of the military who shared his commitment to developing better soldiers through improved training techniques. His first assignment after graduation had been exactly as Admiral Rivera had requested: lead instructor for the Multi-Service Training Initiative. The program brought together exceptional recruits from Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines for intensive leadership development. Marcus had spent 18 months working with some of the most promising young soldiers in the military, and the experience had confirmed Rivera's assessment of his abilities. The success of his programs had attracted attention throughout the military education community. Marcus had been invited to speak at conferences, contribute to training manuals, and consult on program development for other bases. His reputation as an innovative and effective instructor had grown far beyond what he had ever imagined possible. A knock on his office door interrupted his review of the files. His assistant announced that Admiral Rivera was there to see him. Marcus felt a familiar mix of excitement and nervousness as he prepared to see the woman who had changed the course of his career. Admiral Rivera entered the office wearing the relaxed smile Marcus remembered from their final conversation 2 years earlier. She had been promoted since then, and her new position as Director of Military Personnel Development made her one of the most influential officers in the entire military structure. Master Sergeant Steele, Rivera said as they shook hands. Congratulations on your new position. I've been following your progress and I'm impressed with what you've accomplished. Admiral, thank you, Marcus replied. I owe much of my success to the lessons I learned during our week together. That experience fundamentally changed how I approach leadership and training. Rivera took a seat and looked around Marcus's office, which was decorated with certificates and photos from various training programs he had developed. I wanted to speak with you about a new initiative we're developing. We're creating a comprehensive review of military training effectiveness, and I need someone to lead the evaluation team. Marcus realized this was likely to be another significant opportunity, but he was also curious about what Rivera had observed during her broader evaluations of military training programs. What did your overall assessment reveal about our training methods? Marcus asked. Mixed results, Rivera replied honestly. Some programs are excellent, producing confident and capable soldiers who are well prepared for military service. Others are still using outdated methods that focus more on breaking down recruits than building them up. She continued, your approach represents what we want to see more of throughout the military. Training that identifies and develops individual strengths, while building strong team cohesion and leadership skills. Marcus understood that Rivera was offering him a chance to influence training programs across the entire military structure. The responsibility was enormous, but so was the potential impact on future soldiers. What would this evaluation involve? Marcus asked. You would lead a team of instructors and education specialists in reviewing training programs at bases across the country. Your job would be to identify best practices, recommend improvements, and help implement changes that improve soldier development. Rivera explained that the evaluation would take approximately 18 months and would involve direct observation of training programs, interviews with instructors and recruits, and analysis of long-term outcomes for soldiers who had completed different types of training. The goal is to ensure that every recruit, regardless of which base they train at, receives the highest quality preparation for military service, Rivera said. Your experience in developing innovative training methods makes you ideal for this role. Marcus accepted the assignment without hesitation. The opportunity to improve training for thousands of future soldiers was exactly the kind of meaningful work he had hoped his military career would eventually include. As they discussed the details of the new position, Rivera shared something that surprised Marcus. I should tell you that your performance during our week together wasn't just notable for its professional quality. It also taught me something important about leadership evaluation. What do you mean, Admiral? I realized that my initial plan for the evaluation was flawed. I had intended to observe training programs while maintaining complete anonymity, never revealing my identity or rank. Your response to my unusual performance made me understand that transparency and authentic interaction often reveal more about leadership quality than hidden observation. Rivera explained that Marcus's willingness to adapt his approach when faced with unexpected circumstances had demonstrated exactly the kind of flexible thinking that senior leaders needed to possess. Your ability to recognize when your assumptions might be wrong and adjust accordingly is a rare quality, Rivera said. Many people, especially in military hierarchies, become so invested in their initial judgments that they can't see evidence that contradicts their expectations. As their conversation concluded, Rivera offered one final observation that tied together everything Marcus had learned over the past 2 years. The most effective leaders are those who understand that their role is to help others succeed, not to demonstrate their own superiority. You showed that understanding when you changed your approach with me, and you've continued to demonstrate it in every training program you've developed since then. Marcus realized that his journey from drill, instructor to senior training director, had been guided by a simple principle that Rivera had helped him discover. True leadership meant bringing out the best in others, regardless of their apparent rank, experience, or background. As Admiral Rivera left his office, Marcus looked at the files for his next group of instructor trainees and smiled. Among them was a young sergeant who reminded him of himself 2 years earlier, confident in his abilities but limited in his vision of what was possible. Marcus was looking forward to helping that sergeant, and all the others, discover their potential for becoming the kind of leaders the military needed. The lesson that had begun with his failed attempt to intimidate a seemingly overconfident recruit had evolved into a career dedicated to developing the leadership capabilities of soldiers at every level. Marcus had learned that the most important battles in military service weren't always fought on distant battlefields. Sometimes they were fought in training facilities, where the future leaders of the military were shaped and developed. The recruit he had targeted as weak had turned out to be one of the strongest leaders he had ever encountered. In trying to break her down, he had instead been built up, transformed from a competent drill instructor into a leader capable of improving the entire military training system. It was, Marcus reflected, exactly the kind of unexpected outcome that made military service both challenging and rewarding.